Uh, the other thing that we need is the equivalent of um, the equivalent of a repository, right? In JPA, we have the concept of a repository, right? A repository is something that knows how to create, update, insert, delete, right? Anything that we tell it, and we have to tell what, right? The repository, when you configure, you have to say, oh, I want you to CRUD a user, or CRUD a movie, or CRUD, and then we give it some data model. Make sense? And then after it knows what it needs to insert and update and delete, you can then use some of the functions that are the default functions, right? You know, the repository has a find all, it has a delete, right? It has a find by ID, it has a lot of built-in functions that it exports and allows us to interact with the database. Yes, same thing here. Same thing here. Here in mongoose jargon, those repositories are referred to as just models, right? The model, or sometimes we're going to refer to as the mongoose model, right? So here we're going to create the user model, understanding that this is playing the role, right, of a DAO, of a data access object, right, that knows how to CRUD users in this case. Yes. All right. So to do this, we're going to say mongoose dot model lowercase, and then this model takes two arguments. One is how do we want to uniquely refer to this model, and two, what is the schema? Right? The schema makes sense, right? Because even in the repository, when we created the repository, we had to provide the Java data model, right? And say, oh, I want you to CRUD movies or users or whatever. We need to tell. Plus, we had to provide the primary key. Yes. Although it looks like the primary key is being handled by the database. We're not going to do anything with the primary key. So the first argument is a string, and I'm going to give it a unique identifier. It doesn't matter what you use here. It's a unique identifier as far as Mongoose is concerned, right? Mongoose, every time you create a model, it has to have a unique identifier, right? Comma, the schema. So in this case, it's the user schema, right? With the user schema, it will know how to insert, update, delete users. All right, so now that we have the user model will provide all sorts of methods that would allow us to manipulate interact with the data, right? So for instance, you can say user model dot find, right? User dot find. So this dot find is going to behave very much like the find in the console, right? So one of the things that the folks at Mongoose, what they try to do is to make the API of the library as much as possible as close to what you actually would type at the console, right? Again, I think the only glaring difference is that instead of insert, there's a create. Right? I think that's the only big glaring difference. But other than that, most of the commands that you would type here follow very much the same syntax that you would find also in the Mongo console. All right, so let's do find. Now, here we would have perhaps const users. And we would perhaps do console.console log users. Let's see what that does. Okay. Okay, so notice that we still have that hello world at the end, right? But before that, we printed out users. Look what it printed. It's not quite what we expected, right? And we were expecting these two users, right? This is what we were expecting. Instead, what we got is something different. Okay. What we got is pretty much the entire API that we can still manipulate and keep interacting, right? What we get back here is not the data. What we get back is a object that allows us to talk to the database in an asynchronous fashion, right? Here we have the Node.js is running in its own thread, right? Mongo is also running in its own thread, perhaps running in a separate server, halfway across the world. Yes, right. So this communication, this right here, right? That's an asynchronous call, right, out to the database. Yes. What you get back is not the actual data. What you get back is a way for you to register for a callback in the future for the server to respond to you and say, hey, here's your data. Right? One of the unfortunate things is that Node.js is single-threaded, right? And because it's single-threaded, you don't want to risk making a synchronous call and getting stuck here waiting for this response to resolve, right? Especially because this is some remote resource, right? It might take a while for this to come back, yes? And because you're single-threaded, you don't want to risk your single thread being stuck here. In Java, Java's multi-threaded. You can have all sorts of threads running around. It's fine if you have a thread waiting. You can have a whole bunch of other threads doing a whole bunch of things. Not here. It's single-threaded. So instead, what you get back is called a promise. A promise that at some point, hopefully soon, I will be able to resolve your answer. Okay? Right? And actually, that's fine. So that promise allows us to. The promise has it's an object. It's an object, and that object has a function on it called then. Right? The then function allows you to register for a callback and say, hey, notify me sometime in the future, right, when the data comes back. Right? I don't want to wait for it now. Right? Here's the function for you to call me, right? Notify me. Right? And that function could be, you can call it whatever you want. You can say, here's a function. Find or notify users. Okay, and ideally, this is the data that would come back, and I'm just going to do a console.data. Well, actually, that data hopefully is users. Hopefully, yes, and I can register this notify users right here. Right, that promise allows me to register. Yes. Very good. Yes. It's based on this name right here. It's based on that name, right? And that's going to give us a problem because my collection is called users, right? And let's see what happens here. Yeah, we still have just users. Right? If I would have inserted, what would have happened here is that it would have created a new collection based on this name, and it would have made it all lowercase, user model, right? And it would have capitalized it. Not capitalized. It would have made it plural, user models, right? And that's not the collection I want to map. Right? Very good catch. We have to explicitly. We can override that and say, no, don't try to guess what the collection is, right? Instead, I'm going to tell you exactly which collection to use. So in the schema, when I'm declaring the schema, I can tell you exactly which collection to use. It's users, right? If I don't have this is optional. This one is optional. If I don't have that explicit mapping, right, it will try to derive it from the name that I give it here in the what I call the model, right? And then pluralize it, which is even worse. Okay. Okay, very good. So let's try this out. Let's run this. See if this blows up. Okay, there they are, right? These are my users. It came back as an array of users, right? Because I asked for all of them.